Hey guys, I figured we'd hear from Peter Schiff, see what he thinks.
That Tennessee,
Well, they already did 20 in fast food restaurants.
crazy, and now Tennessee, I think, is proposing 26, and they're like 850. I think they're really trying to jump up there. Can businesses sustain this type of wage growth to cover the inflation? I mean, because that seems like what they're trying to do.
Yeah, well, look, it's not about what the business can sustain, it's what the worker can command. Because a lot of workers don't have $20 an hour worth of productivity. And so if you force employers to pay people $20 an hour, then if you're not that productive, you're legally unemployable. You can't get a job. The government prices people out of the labor market. And this is the worst time to be trying to force higher wages on employers who now have AI and automation and robotics that they can turn to. You know, the government always creates these problems. During the Great Depression, the reason that unemployment was so high was because the government, starting with Hoover, leaned on employers not to reduce wages, even as prices were collapsing. And they kept wages high, and so they fired workers instead. Now, it would have been better if they just reduced wages and they could have kept people. But the wages wouldn't have really gone down in real terms because the cost of living was going down. And by not allowing wages to fall along with other prices, labor became too expensive, and so businesses had to cut back, and so they laid people off. But now, trying to force businesses to overpay their workers, they're not going to do it. I mean, they'll overpay some if they have to, but at the expense of firing a lot of other people. So there are some lucky winners from the minimum wage, but there are more losers who end up losing their jobs. But now, with automation easier, there could be even more losers. And of course, the customers all lose because as a result of higher wage costs mandated by the government, prices are higher for everything that those workers are helping to produce, or all the services that they are helping to provide. But again, the people who are hurt the most are the people who don't get jobs, or the people who lose their jobs. And more importantly, they're denied the opportunity to climb up the job ladder because they can't improve their skills with on-the-job training because they don't get a job, and so they don't get the training, and so they're trapped in poverty indefinitely. And many of them may end up turning to crime, which has all sorts of other negative implications for society.
Tell me about unemployment. Are the numbers that we're seeing, are they cooked? I mean, are they real numbers?
No. I mean, none of the government numbers are honest. I mean, that's the one thing, they're consistent, right? They lie about everything. But it's very difficult nowadays to be considered unemployed, even if you don't have a job. I mean, first of all, if you've been unemployed for over a year, they don't count you. You drop out of the statistics. You would think those people should count extra. But if I've been unemployed for 5 years and I still can't find a job, why aren't you counting me as unemployed, right? I mean, I'm really unemployed. I should count, maybe twice. Then, as long as you have any job while you're looking for a job, let's say I'm out there looking for a job every day, but for 1 day a week I work part-time at McDonald's. Well, I'm not unemployed anymore. Or if I drive an Uber, in my spare time while I'm looking for a job, well, I'm not unemployed anymore. So a lot of people that would have been counted as unemployed in the past, they're not counted anymore. So it's not that we have a low unemployment rate, we just don't keep track of it accurately. There are a lot more people who are not working and who are unemployed who would have been counted had we done the methodology, used the methodology from the 1970s or 1980s or even the 90s. But since we've tweaked it so much, deliberately I think, to create a false picture of the employment market, the numbers are not honest. Same thing with inflation. Inflation is actually much higher than the government numbers would reveal because that's how they've been designed. They've been designed deliberately to underreport the rate at which prices are rising because they take those rising prices and they have all kinds of ways of adjusting them to make the rise smaller. And that also means that the GDP numbers are inflated. The economy is not growing nearly as fast as the government claims. In fact, I think the economy is shrinking at the same time the government claims it's growing.
So if you're unemployed for more than a year, they don't count that?
Right, yeah, you drop out. You're the long-term unemployed, so
Wow.
you don't count as being unemployed anymore.
That's crazy.
And if you're looking for a job, but you work part-time while you're looking, you're still not unemployed. Now they have another statistic for that. They call you underemployed, and that guy shows up someplace else. They call that the U6 number. But no one talks about the U6 number. That's not the number that's in the headlines. And that number is a lot higher than the one that makes the newspapers or the evening news.
But meanwhile, they're not making enough money to keep their self afloat, to pay their credit card bills, their auto loans, their mortgages in some circumstances.
Yeah. That's why we create so many jobs, because a lot of workers have 2 or 3 of those jobs. In fact, over the last couple of years, there have been no new on net full-time jobs created. 100% of the jobs that Biden is bragging about having created were part-time jobs that went to people who were already employed in at least one job, if not 2. And so why are people moonlighting in record numbers? Why do so many people have to work evenings and work weekends? Because they can't afford to pay the rent. They can't afford the grocery bill or the utility bill. This is not a strong labor market. If the labor market was strong, one job would cut it. The fact that so many people need 2 or 3 jobs shows you how weak those jobs are. You can't live on a job anymore. And the cost of living is 30-40% higher than it was when Biden took office. That's a big increase. Where are people getting that money? A, they're working harder on a second job, and B, they're going deeper into debt. That's why household debt, all-time record high. Credit card debt, all-time record high. Even though credit card interest rates are at an all-time record high, the amount of debt is at an all-time high. So that means the burden of paying is really at an all-time record high. So along with everything else, that's what's gone up. How much money you have to send to credit card company every month.
And I think a lot of the jobs, like you said, that are posted, I think they're not even available jobs. I hear where all these people are applying for these jobs, and younger people are coming out of college and trying to get hired, and they literally fill out 100 online applications and submit their resumes, and they don't hear back from one. And this I'm hearing a lot. And just to touch on what you said too, I think it's amazing. Somewhere along the line, we can no longer survive on one paycheck. If a lot of these young people that we're helping, and whether it's renting, whether they're just looking for an apartment or a house to rent, they don't make enough money to even rent on their own. They're 35 years old and need a roommate.
You have a record number of young adults that live with their parents now. I mean, all-time record. But most families haven't been able to survive on a single paycheck since the 1960s. Because before the 1970s, and it really started in earnest during the 80s, but before then, if a woman got married, if she had a job, she quit.
I just discovered a brand new indicator that allows you to track and trade bullish cycles hidden inside shares.
Married women did not work. In fact, if you were married and your wife worked, it was embarrassing for you. I mean, most husbands would take a second job before they let their wife have a first job. And it didn't matter whether you were white collar, blue collar. Blue collar workers could still afford to support a stay-at-home wife, mother, and raise their kids. They just, maybe they had a smaller house and they didn't have as expensive cars, or they didn't take as lavish a vacation, but they were able to afford to support their family, which included a wife who did not have to go to a job and get a paycheck. And so what happened was, the inflation was so bad during the 1970s, the dollar lost so much value that husband's paycheck could no longer support the stay-at-home wife and mother. And that's what began the influx of married women into the workforce. It wasn't women's liberation, right? That's what they want to tell us, that they got liberated They didn't get liberated. They got unliberated. They were liberated when they didn't have to work. You know, they could have chosen to work if they wanted to. Now women are forced to work. They got no choice. How is that liberation, right? But it was a lower standard of living. That's what happened. A man couldn't support his wife anymore. The wife had to get a job, right? That is a lower standard of living. Now what's happening is the husband and wife each have a job, and that's not enough. Now they need more jobs. Now they got to get a second job or a third job. The next thing that's going to happen is our young kids are going to have to drop out of school, and they're going to have to go to work too. Because now the parents are going to need, you know, just their kids, that's how it all started before capitalism and the Industrial Revolution. People had kids because they needed the help on the farm, right? The family was working the land. But capitalism increased labor productivity that the father didn't need his kids doing work, didn't need his wife doing work. He could do it all himself. Well, we're going backwards. Now, hopefully, AI can help push against that trend by increasing labor productivity or reducing the need for labor in some cases altogether, because we have you know, computers that can think.
Well, that's scary in itself. So what you're saying essentially we now are in a situation, in an environment where you need both mom and dad to work to pay the bills. However, now we're dumping these kids off with other people to raise them. They go to daycare full time. So we have very little influence and impact in their life in a lot of cases when we're out working, especially if you're getting into 2 and 3 jobs, and we're seeing it. But now we're talking about AI that could eliminate jobs and maybe allow one of the parents to stay home, whether it's mom or dad, to stay home. But now they can't afford to because the costs are so high.
Yeah, and you know, it's not just inflation, but it was tax increases. The taxes went up a lot during the 1970s, 1980s, even with Reagan, but before Reagan. He had some cuts, but not enough to offset what happened in the 70s. And so, yeah, I mean, more of your paycheck was taken away and sent to government, and so you had less available for yourself and your family. In fact, in many cases, when the wife got a job, she just earned what her husband paid in taxes. And so the wife was working for the government, and the husband was working for the family. But yeah, I mean, the government is constantly growing in size and imposing a greater burden on the population. At the same time, capitalism is trying to ease that burden by innovating. You know, capitalism is a force for good, government is a force for bad. Capitalism creates abundance, and governments create scarcity. Capitalism increases production and increases quality and lowers cost. Government reduces quality and increases costs, right? And so you want more freedom and less government. But unfortunately, we've been headed in the other direction.
Will it ever turn around?
I hope so. You know, when it gets bad enough. Look, hey, they're turning around in Argentina right now. What do you know? They got a free market, libertarian as president, and he's cutting spending like crazy. He's eliminating departments. He's firing government workers. You know, he's doing what needs to be done. So, you know, if they could do it in Argentina after 100 years of mistakes and bad policy and impoverishing a once extremely wealthy nation, you know, maybe there's hope for us.
Well, I mean, you bring up a good point. So let's talk about the global economy. Japan's in a recession. The UK is said to be in a recession. Germany is likely in a recession. Finland and Ireland are said to be in recessions. Now, how does their recession affect the U.S. economy? And can we actually are we causing these countries to be in a recession?
All the countries are experiencing the negative consequences of the same monetary and fiscal policy mistakes. We all made them, especially during COVID. But everybody had interest rates too low. I mean, in Europe and Japan, they were negative. I mean, they didn't even stop at zero. They went negative. And all these governments ran large deficits. So everybody is paying the price. And everybody made the same mistake, and everybody is suffering a similar consequence. I just think that America is uniquely positioned to suffer more because we have a lot more to lose, because we have the reserve currency, and I think we're going to lose that. And so I think the U.S. is going to be in worse shape than Europe or Japan, based on the loss of a privilege that neither of those economic zones enjoy. And so our economy, our prosperity was false going into this, because it was built on a foundation of debt and the dollar's reserve status. We were able to sustain ourselves because we can afford to import record amounts of goods that we couldn't produce with the paper that we printed. But when the dollar crashes, then we can't do that anymore. And the whole house of cards comes tumbling down.
People want to say that would never happen. You know, a friend of yours, I just spoke with him, Brent Johnson. We were talking about the dollar, and you know, he believes that it's going to continue and remain strong and be the last. If the whole world would crash before we would. But let's talk about the BRICS, because a lot of people I think are underestimating the BRICS nations. He believes that it's never going to get off the ground, that it's just propaganda or hearsay right now. But I mean, these countries are coming together. They want to compete with the US dollar. Their current system, as we know it, has been dominated by the dollar for a long time. And I think that is said to account for about 90% of all currency trading, the dollar. Until last year, I think almost 100% of oil trading was conducted in dollars, but in 2023 it was said that only like a fifth of oil trades were made using the US dollar. In a recent article on BusinessInsider.com, they quoted Tucker Carlson's recent interview with Vladimir Putin, and Putin said, to use the dollar as a tool of foreign policy struggle is one of the biggest strategic mistakes made by the US political leadership. And he said that it is the main weapon used by the United States to preserve its power across the world. And as soon as political leadership decided to use the US dollar as a tool of political struggle, a blow was dealt to the Americans' power. And he said it was a stupid thing to do and a grave mistake. Putin also said that Russian ruble and the Chinese yuan have largely replaced the US dollar in his country's trade activities, and suggested that America's economic sanctions are hurting its economy. Any thoughts on this?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, in the short run, from a political perspective.
So the lie detector results are in, and Tom Brady
It's an old expression, you don't bite the hand that feeds you. And we were being fed by nations that were holding on to dollars as their reserves. And then we punished Russia for doing what we wanted them to do, which was hold large US dollar reserves instead of spending those dollars and having them bid up US prices. And they invested those dollars in US treasuries. And so that helped sustain our deficits, and Americans didn't have to buy the treasuries because the Russians were doing it. Well, we punished the Russians for doing that. And when we did that, we sent a clear signal to the rest of the world, you could be next. If you do anything that the United States does not like, this is what's going to happen to you. And so what I would do if I was China, I was Saudi Arabia, I was India, I was anybody, I'd be like, oh, well, I'm not going to let what happened to Russia happen to me. I get your message. I'm out of the dollar. I don't want them anymore. And that's the source of our power. That's the source of our standard of living, the dollar. And the world is starting to divest themselves of dollars. Now, what are they buying with the dollars they're selling? Because in order to get out of the dollar, you have to get into something. They're getting into gold. That's what they've been buying. That's why gold's at an all-time record high today. That's why, despite the fact that individuals have been selling gold for months, gold's hitting a new all-time record high today because central banks are buying the gold to replace the dollar. And they are preparing for a new gold standard where gold is going to be the key monetary reserve asset, not US dollars. And that's what's happening. And people haven't woken up. They're too busy distracted by, the con game in crypto to notice what's happening with gold. But on a bigger scale, they're not noticing what this portends for the United States and for this phony prosperity that we've enjoyed because we've been able to export money that we print for the goods everybody else produces. It costs nothing to conjure money into existence, but it takes a lot of resources to create goods, consumer goods. And so this is huge, what's going on. And people are just, whistling past this graveyard. But I'm doing everything I can. Now, I'm set financially. I've got all my economic, ducks in a row. But I've been telling people they got to buy gold, they got to buy silver instead of cash. Record highs. Silver is still less than half of its record high. So silver is really a bargain. Gold's still cheap, but silver's dirt cheap. But also, I'm managing portfolios. I'm getting people out of Dodge by taking their portfolios out of U.S. bonds, particularly out of U.S. stocks, especially the hyped up, overpriced, not so magnificent 7 or all these hype, mania stocks, bubble stocks. And I'm buying real value. Good businesses that have good resources, plant, equipment, natural resources, lots of income, lots of dividends in countries that are much sounder, better fiscal monetary policy. That's where you got to preserve your wealth. You got to get out of dollar assets in order to preserve your purchasing power. And we're running out of time to do that. So you should contact my advisors, Europe Pacific Asset Management. Talk to my guys about your portfolio and how we can take over the management and get you in the right assets. If you're a do-it-yourselfer and you have a discount brokerage account, I've got 5 mutual funds that I manage. You can buy them no load at any of these major firms. My gold fund, my emerging market fund, my international value fund, international dividend payers, and my foreign bond fund. Those are the 5 funds I've got, and they should all act as a safety net to preserve wealth and protect it from the stagflation that we're just getting started here.
Peter, we'll drop all those links in the show notes. You just brought up something. So one of the things that I hear a lot, and I may be somewhat guilty myself, of saying, I don't understand the gold. Where do you put it? Where do you store it? Things like that. But when you see that gold prices are going up, you just said something that I think is really key. Because if other countries want to get out of the dollar, they have no more faith in the dollar. This fiat currency that's just been spread around, overproduced, that we see that it's not really backed by anything other than the confidence to know that you can walk in a restaurant and buy a sub or a sandwich or a dinner because you did yesterday, until all of a sudden now you can't because it's not enough anymore to do so. But you said that central banks are buying it, and I think that is something that everyone really needs to pay attention to, because that, if the gold prices are going up, it's not necessarily just consumers going out saying, hey, Peter's saying to buy gold, we should run out there. But you're telling us that these central bankers, and that is sort of like a precursor to a potential collapse.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you don't think these guys know what they're doing? They're in control of the money. What are they doing? They're buying gold. They know what's coming, right? The public is clueless. If you look at the ETF GLD, for the last 9 weeks, money has gone out. 9 weeks of consecutive outflows, a record. As gold keeps making new highs, and now it's at an all-time record high. Normally, the public doesn't do that. The public buys high and sells low. Normally, if gold was making a high, the public would be buying, not selling. They've been selling. Right? That's the dumb money. The smart money is buying as much gold as they can get their hands on. And the media is distracting the public with fool's gold, talking about all these Bitcoin ETFs. A lot of people probably sold gold stocks last week to buy the Bitcoin ETFs. I was taking advantage of that. I was putting more of my own money into gold stocks. Newmont Mining last week hit a 5-year low. This week, gold hit an all-time record high. That's never happened. People are dumping gold stocks while gold prices are soaring. That's how clueless people are. They've been so dumbed down by the mainstream media. that they don't know what's happening, and they're not doing the proper things financially. We are very close, I think, to a major explosion up in the price of gold. That's a big thing. It's not gold. The gold price is not just some other commodity. If gold is really going up, that is the canary in the coal mine. You better get the hell out of that mine, because something bad is going to happen. And the Fed is, of course, ignoring all these warning signs, and most investors are too.
Do you think the BRICS nation, do you think they have the ability to compete with the dollar and hurt our dollar rather quickly?
They absolutely have the ability to do that, and they will do that. And people are underestimating their ability to do that. There's a lot of complacency with respect to the dollar's role. There's a lot of hubris there. But no, because the important part is the production. They've got the important part. They've got the factories. They've got the trained workers. They produce the stuff. All we do is create inflation. We print money. Big deal.
Let's talk about the stability of banks. A couple of weeks ago, I went out and met with WaFd's CEO. They were just buying another bank, making it probably, I think, 209 or 219 branches, $60 billion of assets. Last year, we experienced the biggest banking failures, some of the biggest banking failures in U.S. history. The Fed stepped in on March 12th, created a rescue initiative called the Bank Term Funding Program. You're familiar with it. It's said to end making new loans on March 11th. I've read articles where they said U.S. banks and other depository institutions actually used, or some may say even abused, this program for profitable arbitrage. One might think that, I mean, it was by design. In this chart here, you can see two spikes in BTFP lending.
Mark Zuckerberg just built a $100 million bunker in Hawaii, but he's only one of the 15 known billionaires who are now preparing for the worst. So,
initially, when the program was created, and then it slowed down slightly, and then skyrocketed again in December of 2023. The outstanding loans owed by the banks are said to be about $160 billion. Will this ever get paid off, or will they just write it off?
Well, they can't pay it off, but they pretended last year that these were loans. And the loans are due this month, later this month. And none of the borrowers can repay. If they did, they would immediately be even more insolvent than they were on the day they borrowed the money. So the Fed is going to have to come up with an excuse to extend this. But the question is, will the markets see through the smoke screen and realize that these are not loans, that this is permanent debt monetization, that America is a banana republic, just without the bananas, and that's bad for the dollar, and that, and again, that's why the dollar's going down. It's why the price of gold's going up.
Which could be why the banks bought even more or not bought, but borrowed even more in December, because they knew maybe that, hey, this is never going to need to be paid back. So let's just get on this bandwagon as fast as we can, extract as much money. But what will the long-term implications be? So let's just say they decide to end this program. They stick to that as of March 11th. No more emergency funding, especially at the loan, at the way they were doing it. But will there be any bank implications at that point? Or will the bank say, hey, it's great, it's all over anyway, we got what we could, and now we're doing fine?
Remember, thanks to the government's policy since the 2008 financial crisis, the entire banking industry is insolvent. And it needs the support of the government to stay afloat. But the government can only support the banks if it sucks the wealth from the people by creating inflation. So it's a house of cards built on a house of cards, and it's in the process, I think, of imploding, and we're going to suffer. People, if you have your money in a bank, you are going to lose. Either your bank is going to fail, and you're not going to get your money out of it, or your bank fails and you get your money. But if you get your money, it's not going to buy you very much, because the government's going to have to print it in order for you to get it. And so it's either you lose your money or your money loses its value. But either way, you lose. Which is why I'm telling people, get your money out of the bank while you can and do something with it. Convert it into something real. Like those foreign central banks, what are they doing with their dollars? They're converting them into gold. So you could do that too, but you could also build a bigger portfolio that includes income-producing assets. You know, whether it's real estate, income-producing real estate, or dividend-paying stocks. You've got to buy real things, because at the end of the day, that's all that's left when you have hyperinflation. The paper claims to wealth disappear, but what's left is the actual stuff.
Banks lend out all of the depositors' money. I mean, this is really amazing to me. I mean, no more vault money, no need to have that, reserve for bank runs. You created a bank that secured the depositors' money. You didn't lend any of their money out.
Yes, and the government destroyed it. Because first they claimed that I was helping criminals launder money and evade taxes. And then after a 2-year investigation by like 7 governments, they found absolutely no evidence of that whatsoever. And so then they probably pressured the local regulators to close the bank by claiming it was critically insolvent, which was a joke because we were probably the most solvent bank in the world with no loans and no debt. So they lied and said that we had lax compliance when we probably had more compliance than any other bank. 40% of my 65-man and woman staff was in the compliance department, right? 30 of 65 people worked in compliance. I had 1 guy working in marketing, 35 in compliance. So I was more compliant than any bank, and I didn't make any loans. I was more solvent than any bank. And so the government clearly had to put me out of business, which is what they did. And by the way, when the local regulators said that they were putting my bank into a receivership with a trustee, they said they were doing that to protect the customers. Now, in the year before they did that, 75% of my money was withdrawn. I had about 175 million in deposits, and by the time they put it in receivership, it was down to like 65 million. So I was able to, on my own, without the government, return 75% of the money, 100% of what was requested, right? No other bank could have done that. They would have gone under. I didn't need any government help. I didn't have to go to the Fed for anything. We just had the money, so we gave it back to the people who owned it. Then the government stepped in and said, okay, we've got to protect you. It's been over 20 months, and not one customer has gotten 1 penny out of my bank. In fact, the customers have gotten together and they had to hire a lawyer, and they're trying to force the government here in Puerto Rico to give them back their money. But meanwhile, the only one that's gotten money out of the bank is the guy that they appointed to be the receiver. He's getting rich. He makes a ton of money, all coming out of the bank.
It is amazing. So in reading up on a lot of that, I mean, it really seemed like a witch hunt almost. And the crazy thing about it was, so I asked these bankers when I went to Washington, I said, how is it that the Fed, Jay Powell, can stand in front and testify to Congress that the banking industry is solvent, and then all of a sudden 4 more banks collapse? And they basically said, well, they can't come out and say anything in the news because they will. It's almost like a self-fulfilled prophecy where people will just come and get their money, even though it is the truth that they're in bad shape. But yet it seemed like they did the exact same, they did what they wouldn't do anywhere else to you. They came out. Of course, if somebody comes out and puts all these allegations on somebody, what's somebody going to do? They're going to want to take all their money out. I mean, why do you think, and I mean, if you're not comfortable saying, then obviously don't say it, but why do you think that you have been so forthright and accurate in your predictions? You are, you're data driven. You're speaking things that we're not hearing anybody else say, and then we're seeing it that it's what you're saying is happening. Do you think that's why they came after you?
Yeah, look, I think there's no question that the government and the mainstream media wanted to discredit me. They don't want people paying attention to what I'm saying, and so they want to destroy my credibility. And they did that by branding me a criminal and shutting down my bank and getting the New York Times and other newspapers to promote fake news about the bad things that I was doing. And they succeeded. I'm sure a lot of people who didn't know much about me, as a result of all that bad publicity, probably think negative things about me.
This is where shares of Tesla are trading right now. And this is where Wall Street expects them to be by 2025. That's a 100%.
And that's probably what was the goal. They also didn't like the fact that I was bucking the banking system with 100% reserve bank. I was also encouraging my bank customers to hold their deposits in gold. I made it easy for them to do that. I made it easy for them to use their gold as just like a deposit of currency, that they can spend it. They can wire against it. They could use a debit card tied to it. And so they probably didn't like the fact that I was reintroducing gold as a monetary banking asset, other than just fiat. So yeah, and probably there was, they didn't like the fact that my dad was a tax protester, and so they used that against me too. But the people who know me, my clients, the people who follow me, they never believed any of that nonsense. But certainly my critics were able to seize on it. A lot of people in the crypto community who have been mad at me because I didn't sign on to the mania there, they use that to discredit my views on Bitcoin. Right?
Well, I mean, if the internet goes down, they have nothing.
I did sue the reporters in Australia, and I won a defamation, which is very hard to win a defamation case against a newspaper, against the media. Very hard, because they can hide under freedom of the press and all that stuff. But it was so egregious that I was able to win. The problem is the media is covering up the fact that I won, and you can't even find reports about it. Wikipedia has been completely whitewashed by the establishment that controls that. They won't let any of the reporters, you can't even put on their page that they lost the defamation suit. I can't even put on my page that I won. So it's like a conspiracy among the media to protect their own. You have this liar, this fraud, Nick McKenzie, Charlotte Grieve, Matthew Goldstein, and they tell lies, and then the media tries to prevent people from knowing the truth. In fact, the irony of it is, I put up on the internet, the reporters in Australia, 60 Minutes Australia, they interviewed me for about an hour, and then they selectively edited that interview, and they used little clips of it out of context, and they tried to make me look guilty when the actual interview would have showed my innocence. And so they put this on the air, and I demanded immediately, hey, wait a minute, why don't you release the whole thing so people can see what actually happened? They refused to do it. I got that unedited footage in discovery in my winning lawsuit. And when they knew I was about to publish it, they went into court and they tried to get a temporary restraining order to prevent me from publishing the unedited interview, their own interview. And they told the judge that the public doesn't have a right to see that they shouldn't be able to see the inner workings of a broadcaster. Well, they lost that, and then I put it on my YouTube channel so you can see the actual interview. And then, the actual 60 Minutes broadcast, they had to remove it because it was defamatory. Even though one of the reporters won an award for Best Journalist of the Year for that piece that was ruled defamatory and taken down. And the bank, Citi, that awarded her Best Young Journalist for that particular defamatory piece of journalism, won't even rescind the award. In fact, Nick McKenzie, who lost this defamation suit last week, was just nominated for Reporter of the Year, Journalist of the Year, for the same year that I beat him in a defamation lawsuit. This is how crazy it is. But I then, on my YouTube channel, I also put, I still have that 60 Minutes broadcast that they had to take off the air. So I took the parts about me. So about 9-10 minutes of the 25-minute segment was that interview, the little pieces that they showed. And so I put that back on the internet, and you can watch them. You can watch both videos. You can see the real interview where it says Peter Schiff ambushed, Nick McKenzie ambushes Peter Schiff, because they lied to me about what they were going to interview me about. So the whole thing was a fraud. I got the whole interview up there, and then I got, how Nick McKenzie in 60 Minutes defamed Peter Schiff. I put what they showed the public. And it's a complete disgrace. Now, this guy should not be given an award for journalism. He should be fired from his job. He's not a journalist. The guy's a total fraud. In fact, I've been tweeting out that Nick McKenzie is a liar and a fraud, and then I say, sue me for defamation, because if I'm defaming you. I'm going out in public and saying this guy's a fraud, this guy's a liar. And if I'm wrong, then you sue me. Of course he can't sue me, because truth is an absolute defense. And I've got the proof that he's both.
Well, we'll drop those links in the show notes too for anybody that's interested in watching those videos.
Yeah.
Before I want to talk about the housing market, but before I do, how did you keep it together, man? I mean, they put this whole task force to get against you. You had literally countries that were investigating you. I mean, how were you able to still keep a straight mind, still take care of family, take care of yourself, take care of business? I mean, that had to have been horrifying.
Well, I mean, I had a lot of employees at the bank who were dealing with the government. We had a lawyer, so I wasn't personally involved in the investigation. But yeah, it was a pain in the ass, because, we lost a bunch of money, and that cost me. I had $10 million that I put into the bank capital. I lost every penny of it. I also had buyers for the bank. The last sale, I had a $25 million deal to sell the bank. I was going to get that money, and the government wouldn't let me. They wouldn't let me sell it. They forced it into bankruptcy instead. Even though there were buyers willing to buy it and put even more capital into the bank. After they paid me, they were going to put a lot more money in. So the customers weren't in any danger at all until the government took over and put them in danger. But before the government came in to protect them, they were great. They were fine. They were protected by a strong balance sheet that could have got even stronger had the bank sale been allowed. But I've got my asset management business. They haven't given me any problems there. I got my gold business, Schiff Gold. Haven't given me any problems over there. So those two businesses are still going.
They just didn't want you in banking.
And I have money that I earned in the past. So I mean, I'm okay.
Yeah, well, that's good to know. When we met last year at your home, we were talking about the housing market, and you came from sort of like an opinion, and for somebody that wrote the book on the housing crash and was 100% accurate, you were kind of talking about the asset is in the low 30-year fixed rate mortgage. I mean, many of the people that have mortgages are under 4%. But yet we with the rise in household debt and the expenses of home maintenance and repairs, because we know that they're through the roof. Mortgage delinquencies now are on the rise. I just read a bunch of reports where Fannie Mae has been selling off non-performing and re-performing loans to investors. Inventory is now starting to increase in mortgage rates, and you called that. You said mortgage rates would drop a little bit, and then we'd see a spike in mortgage rates, probably not as high as what you even thought. And I think that even if we see a decline, ultimately they're going to go up again. But have you changed your outlook any on not so much the commercial real estate market, but for the housing market?
Tom Brady has personally gifted each and every one of you with 1 year free of electric vehicle rentals.
Wait, did I pay for that, or did you guys pay for that?
You did, Tom. You get a rental. You get a rental. I get a rental.
What's crazy about business credit is, one, you can get approved for hundreds of thousands of dollars at a 0% interest rate.
Well, I mean, in real terms, housing prices are going to go down quite a bit in the U.S. But in nominal terms, it's hard to say. It's going to be depending on a lot of factors that are local to that particular property and market. But the big thing that housing prices have going for it is the lack of inventory to sell. Because everybody who owns a house and has a mortgage, they ain't selling. They got a mortgage with a 2 handle or a 3 handle. They can't go anywhere. And everything has gotten more expensive except their mortgage. It's the one thing they have that hasn't gone up, and so they're staying there. And that means there's no homes for sale. And it's hard to build homes because it's very expensive with the cost, the raw materials, the labor. So, there's not as many houses on the market. Now, there's going to be more houses on the market. People are going to start to lose their jobs. People are going to die. People are going to have reasons that homes are going to come up for sale. And so over time, there'll be some more inventory. But inflation is going to continue to drive up the replacement cost. And so that's going to keep down building, and it's going to make it, more expensive to build. And it's going to allow landlords to raise their rent. So it's the income producing real estate, maybe multifamily, stuff that lends itself to tenants and rentals. That's where you might have the most upside. Because you'll be, especially if you can get I think now Fannie is they're guaranteeing multifamily loans. You can actually get a government guaranteed loan to buy a fourplex. So
you can get up to 10 of them. Yeah, you can do up to 40 units if you buy 10 and with a 30-year fixed rate mortgage.
Yeah, and you'll be able to keep raising your rents. You just got to make sure you do it in a landlord-friendly state. You don't want to do it in one of these states where your tenants could just stop paying you, and you can't evict them.
The inventory, I think last year as far as sales, we were under 4 million, 3.9 some odd million. I've been telling people, I've been in the housing market for a very long time, built houses. Back in the day, was a contractor for many years, 30 plus years. And I've been telling people, I honestly believe that we've seen the lowest inventory that we're going to see for decades to come. I think what we've been seeing, Peter, is, and a lot of calls are starting to come in now from people, like you said, that they said, you know what, I'm going to wait for interest rates to drop back down again because everybody was saying they would last year, 2 years ago. And they're now saying, you know what, we've waited long enough. We have to sell. We need to move on. We need to downsize. I mean, these are baby boomers. And a lot of these are just looking to, they don't even care that the interest rates are high. They just don't want to continue to pay the high cost of home maintenance and repairs. But we're really starting to see the biggest trend are people that have bought their house in the last 3 or 4 years. They're actually starting, we're seeing where these young people bought their first home, didn't realize that they would get called back into the office, or didn't realize that they didn't want to be in that outer area where they had an ideal of where they wanted to live. They bought in a place that was maybe more rural or whatever the reason, and now they're underwater and needing to bring money to the table if they sell. But you think we'll see interest rates? I mean, you're a money guy. Do you think we'll see, with the Fed pressure, the political pressure? I know the overnight trading rate has nothing really to do with the bond rates and mortgage rates, but do you think we'll get in a situation where we could see a 30-year fixed rate in the 5s over the next, say, 18 to 24 months?
Well, it depends if the Fed starts buying up those mortgages again. Right now it's selling mortgages. But I think inflation is going to be driving mortgage rates higher. So we could see rates in double digits. So there's a real risk there. And if the Fed goes back to buying mortgages, then inflation is going to go even higher. And so the credit is going to dry up if rates aren't allowed to rise to a level that would compensate the lender for what they're losing to inflation. But look, this is a disaster that the government has created, and it will blame it on everybody else and not accept responsibility. But it is one of the few things that's made in America is going to be this crisis, this financial, economic, currency, debt crisis. And it's going to be worse than anything we've lived through in either the Great Recession or the COVID times.
Well, Peter, it's always a pleasure chatting with you. I have the utmost respect for you. I believe that you're actually one of the smartest minds alive today. Any final words of wisdom?
Yeah,
obviously,
it's not that I'm so smart. It's just that everybody else is so dumb. But they're not actually really dumb. I mean, there are a lot of people that have higher IQs than I do that are just getting all this wrong. I mean, so they've just been brainwashed, indoctrinated. They're trapped in a bubble and they're suffering from cognitive dissonance. So it's just that there's a famous book, Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds, and that's what we're in. And I'm just the same guy that everybody in the asylum thinks is insane. I'm maintaining a perspective and common sense, and I understand what's going on. And because I've understood it for so long, people think I'm just a stop clock, because I've been warning about these problems for years as they've been getting bigger and bigger and bigger. They didn't just come out of left field. right? Now, when I first started warning about them, there was enough time to do something, right, to defuse the bomb. Now, we're past the point of no return. The bomb's going off, right? All we can do is brace for the impact.
And people aren't listening, and I think that's the tragedy. Well, thank you so much, Peter. We'll be talking to you soon.
All right, thanks a lot for the opportunity to address your audience.